Hey guys, it's Dash for Zach back with a dual review, this time of the S9 Plus Ultra and the L1 Pro. As you can see, the S9 Plus Ultra here, very similar to their S9 Ultra I reviewed before, that Viper V3 shape, and then the L1 Pro here, a very sick colorway in the pink and blue, a magnesium mouse that takes sort of after the GPX. These are two mice from Eweadn I've been wanting to check out. I did want to see what their sort of final form of their Viper V3 Pro clone was, as well as what their take on magnesium mice looked like. But the real questions here are, does this L1 Pro compete with the GPX 2C, and does this version of the S9 surpass the competition? Let's find out. So here we have them, the Eweadn S9 and L1 Pro. A couple shapes modeled after two of the most popular shapes in the game, the Viper V3 Pro and the Logitech GPX. You've seen me review a couple versions of this S9 before. I had the Ultra in red with the metallic, sort of slightly slipperier coating, and then also the green, hilarious epoxy, sort of smooth gloss coating, which is the head-to-head comparison I'll use for this mouse. And then we have this L1 Pro. It's very similar to the MShow's AX5 or A5 shape, which is a smaller but not really mini GPX is what I would call it. Very similar to the GPX shape, and a mouse that's actually impressed me so far for what it's worth. There's only one version of the L1 Pro, which is the $3395 Omron 100M mechanicals, and the standard PixArt MCU used by Eweadn. And then there is a Pro and Ultra version of this S9 Plus. Pro version having a $3395 and Kale White blades, and this Ultra Plus having the $3950 Ultra, as well as the Omron 100Ms. So with that, let's get into the implementation, and let's start with the S9. Shout out to this Onizoth glass pad from 10x. Absolutely stunning pad, both visually and in use. Anyway, we have the Omron 100Ms in this mouse, and I'm actually going to do the head-to-head comparison as I go here. Magic! The epoxy mouse is back. The Omron 100Ms in this are just slightly more refined, I would say, than they were in the previous implementations of the S9. They're slightly lighter and a little bit more spammable, but also just slightly spongier here if you click really low on the mouse like I do. There's pretty much no play. There's right about a pre-travel, maybe a bit too much post-travel, but really didn't cause any issues for me when trying to click this quickly. And overall, just a slightly better click implementation here than in their other mice. Again, this one here felt a little bit plasticky, a little bit less spammable. Just like you can see, there's a bit more post-travel there. It doesn't rebound quite as well. Just a little bit louder and a little bit cheaper feeling. They were still good in this mouse, but they refined it a bit here in the Ultra Plus, which you love to see. The scroll wheel is plastic here around the edges with this gray rubber here, which if you see me scroll here is slightly uneven, that rubber ring there for some reason. But I will say the steps on this are about the same as the other S9s. They're there, but they're on the lighter side. But the click is extremely spammable, very responsive. So overall, the scroll wheel feels better on this. The click was just a bit stiffer on the original S9 Ultra and Max, and this one comes in feeling just a little higher quality and a little bit more spammable. Coating wise, obviously this one is crazy, super grippy with this like kind of gloss epoxy. Feels wet in the hand with some moisture, whereas this one feels very similar to the red, but like a little bit grittier, a little less slick, I would say. Not anywhere near like a Viper, not the grippiest feel, but solid. It's a passable 7 out of 10. No real complaints. You can feel the grippiness there as you rub your hand across it. Side button wise here, you can see we kept a similar design, but instead of these bare plastic buttons, we have a glossy silver on this, which matches the mouse's aesthetic, and also for me feels better in use. What I will say is this is very similar to the main clicks. It was a bit heavier here on the older mouse. The new iteration here is lighter, more spammable. There's less post-travel and also less pre-travel, so they do feel noticeably easier to use in game. And there's even very minimal wobble here, which is nice to see. They're large, they're shaped just like a Razer Viper V3 Pro side buttons, so they feel very good in use, and they're a strong pass for me. A little more essential here on this than on our mice. Coming to the build quality, the build integrity on the S9 has always been very good. That is maintained here on the new Ultra Plus. There was no bottom, side, or flex anywhere on this mouse. And again, I'm not detecting any flex at any point, top, bottom, front, sides, or on the hump. Build integrity on this is absolutely rock solid, and I would expect it to be. Another part that they improved this mouse on, obviously, is the skate design. I think it was the feedback I and a lot of others had. So as you can see, this unneeded dongle storage here removed. Now one big pad in the back, and they also increased the height of the pad here in the front. Sensor position did stay the same. I will say these are still not my favorite skates. They are for what it's worth here. Nicely rounded and thick, very smooth. They're on the slower side of stock skates. They don't feel bad in use. Maybe a bit more tug on the smaller micro adjustments you might make, which bring more static friction into play than the smooth dynamic glide. They have a very controlled dynamic glide with plenty of stopping power. Again, not my favorite stock skate, but a nice improvement to see here, and I appreciate them listening to the feedback and increasing the size of the skates. So overall, I would say this is a market improvement on the previous S9s. Nothing otherworldly, sort of like a nice iterative improvement, which you would expect from the Plus. Higher level sensor, which in theory should perform better on certain glass pads, does allow for slightly more precise LOD adjustments, but overall you probably won't feel much of a performance difference. If you already have an S9, you probably don't need to get the Ultra Plus, but if you're going to pick up any version, unless you're very partial partial to the red colorway or really want this glossy coating. The Plus does seem like the best version of this mouse to get. Again, with all the slight incremental improvements, the side buttons feel really good. The main clicks are pretty spammable for on-rod 100Ms. It has a nice overall aesthetic, good build quality, a grippy enough coating, and nice large pad skates. This is probably like 1 out of 10 better than the previous S9, so it is very competitive, especially for the price. I believe the Ultra is 65, the Pro Plus 55 on their site right now. Plus you can get some coupons or referral codes off of that. So a very good value here and a solid alternative to the Viper V3 Pro, as well as the ATK X1 and the MCHO's K7. Both the X1 and the K7 at their very top trim levels will come in $20 to $30 more expensive than this mouse. And I think that with the solid implementation is how this fits in the market. So just one more thing I noticed while editing, this mouse is actually advertised at 56 plus or minus 4 grams, which is distinctively 1 to 3 grams lighter than the S9 non-plus is advertised at. And it comes in at 62.5 grams. So not only is it at the top of that plus minus 4 range, it's 2 to 3 grams heavier than that. It's not any lighter than the other mice in the lineup. So do not use that as a factor in buying this mouse. Shout out this unreleased Evolution pad. Bringing our little buddy, the L1 Pro here into play. This is a magnesium mouse. As you can see here, like I said, after the GPX shape, this is a little bit older of a mouse, but one that I think was overlooked and probably should not have been. Very similar to the Attack Shark R2, but larger. The R2 is more in the size range of this Superlight 2C, which I'll compare this to here shortly, and I will be doing a review of the 2C coming up here soon. The L1 Pro, as you may be able to see here in the sides, has the Guano green shell white dots, the transparents, one of my actually preferred mechanical switches outside of blue shell pink dots. The clicks here are more tactile. I would say the S9 Plus clicks were probably a light to medium actuation. This is firmly a medium actuation. There's some pre-travel there, not a lot of post-travel. You do get a very spammable switch, and that can be clicked consistently, but it's not the lightest. So like on a CPS test, you wouldn't probably get the highest score because it does take a bit of time for that to rebound, but it is consistent in that rebound. There's literally no side-to-side play at all on this right click, and a bit more here on the left. It does get very heavy here at the top if you click higher, but it's still firmly a medium actuation at this point on the button, and even later here at the bottom with a bit more play as you click. So overall, the implementation of these clicks is fine, not amazing. Pretty good for magnesium. It doesn't feel stiff like I felt in some other magnesium mice. The scroll wheel is a little bit notchier than their other scroll wheels. Defined steps above medium. The initial click on the scroll wheel is a little bit stiff. It's not the most spammable, but it's also not the stiffest. Just sort of a middle road, decent scroll wheel implementation, I would say. Coming to the side buttons on this, it actually has these goated big ridge side buttons. The same ones you would have found on the Ippy Float and also on the R11, and this is the IPI Chi that I'll be reviewing. This is actually my favorite side button design, and if they made these a little bit larger, they would be absolutely perfect. The ridge makes them super easy to actuate. They protrude very nicely from the side here, as you can see. They're very light and spammable with a nice tactility. They don't sink into the shell, and there's no pre-travel. These side buttons are pristine. I've seen them implemented very well on every mouse they're on. I think more companies should use this side button design or something akin to it. Looking here at the bottom of the mouse, obviously there are some holes on it. These stock skates are actually pretty similar to those that are on the S9 Ultra Plus. I found these to be a little bit quicker. They're thick and nicely rounded. Again, black PTFE, not my favorite, but they do get the job done. And the sensor position on this mouse is very central. As you can see here, we have a spot for this dock here, which serves as both a charging dock as well as a receiver. Not a feature that I'm absolutely huge on. You can see you control the lights here on the thing, but it is a feature that some people do absolutely love, so definitely worth me mentioning here. Back to the mouse's implementation, it is just a magnesium mouse here, so like it's not the grippiest, but there is actually like some level of coating it feels on this. It doesn't seem like it's like raw. It's actually surprisingly grippy. This holes here, I will say they are large here on the back, but with how I grip them, there's a bit of like the meat of my hand sinking into this hole right here. So you do want to be aware of that based on the large size of these holes, sort of like how the Upmaker Carbon X, actually, which even has larger holes here, has, but I think this was a little bit more of a thoughtful design with how the palm hits the back. This doesn't really bother me too much, but again, I do feel right here, this sinking in a little bit. So overall, due to the size of the mouse, I am locked in with this because the GPX shape, since it's narrower with how my grip is, I can sort of wedge it in nicely and lock in and still allow for some nice micro adjustments. And the coating on this definitely could be slipperier, so it's not bad, but that along with the shell design is not optimal. Obviously, solid shells are preferred by most, I think, unless you really want this sort of ping pong golf ball hole aesthetic. And then last but not least here, the build quality is generally solid, but there is a little bit of creaking. If you press right here on the side, you can see a bit of flex and you can hear potentially a bit of creaking, maybe not on the microphone there. Absolutely no bottom flex at all. No flex here on the sides. Even with these large holes here on the back, like no give here when I'm pressing in. Just like I said, a little bit of side creaking, not even necessarily always there, and not something you would encounter in game. So overall, the build quality is not spectacular, but definitely plenty passable. So when it comes to the overall implementation of this mouse, weight balancing. People commented about this. I'm going to talk about it. Bringing the S9 back, to me, this feels nicely balanced, pretty central, pretty much right in line with the sensor. I'm not really detecting any issues. This mouse also feels very well weight balanced, so nothing really out of the ordinary for either of these mice, but overall implementation of the L1 Pro here is, I would say, good, not great, probably like a 7.5 out of 10. It is a solid, smaller GPX alternative. The length of this mouse is 123 millimeters. I believe the normal GPX is 125 or 126, so it's a slightly slightly scaled down version of that. Grabbing my actual GPX2, which I do, yes, still have. You can see here how it's relatively similar, just a little bit larger here on the GPX. Something you'll notice with the GPX shape here is as they get smaller or larger, the taper profile from the bottom, you can tell is a little bit different. It happens over a little bit of a longer period of time here on the GPX. And it's actually a little bit more pronounced. You can see here, it's just like a little blip in and then it comes a little bit back out to the front, but it's still a very safe, generic flat side profile on the L1 Pro. Very similar click height as well. And as you can see here, the hump on the GPX is just a little bit taller, so that was scaled down on the L1. I would say in hand, this does just feel like a GPX, basically that potato shape, because it's not the widest mouse, has very flat sides and a very similar hump and front profile. It does feel like a slightly scaled down GPX, so if you think the GPX is a little bit too large for your hand, but you don't want to go too small, this is a decent option, especially if you want to pick up one of the cool colorways they have. I love this blue pink, but they also have like a silver, a gunmetal gray, and a black, so decent options for colorways. This is obviously the best one. Comparison to the Logitech GPX Mini or the 2C, very apparent here how much smaller this mouse is, but something Logitech did maintain on this, even though they shrunk it down, I think is the hump height, which stands out to me on making this mouse very comfortable in hand, even though it's only 118 millimeters in hand, so 5 millimeters shorter than the L1 Pro. You can again see here there is a more slightly defined taper because of the shorter length of this mouse. It's really most apparent here on the sides. Tell this is a little less flat because they did maintain a decent back flare on this mouse. Obviously we have some larger skates here on the front of the GPX 2C, but we maintain a similar click height, and here's the point I was trying to make earlier. This maintains the hump height of the original GPX more or less, so it's still a little bit taller than the L1 Pro, which I do prefer the taller hump height if you're going to make my mouse shorter for some nice palm stability while tracking. The hand feel for these is actually distinctively different. This feels much closer to a GPX because the size is very similar, and this does feel like truly a GPX Mini. I would call this like a GPX 1.75. This is the GPX size 1 if we're talking pulsar sizes. Probably can guess about the implementation of this GPX Mini. I'll talk about it more in my actual review. Also, a distinctly more protruding scroll wheel here on the 2C with its phantom jumping issues. Logitech. This is the very, very small version of the mouse. This is just the slightly scaled down version in magnesium. So if you're looking for a more premium feeling product with a solid side button implementation, decent clicks, skates, and build quality, and a pretty sick colorway, then you can look no further than the L1 Pro. It does retail at $80, which I think is maybe a bit steep, but if you love the colorway or want magnesium, you are going to have to pay that bit of a premium price to get those features. So it's about right in line with the X5 from what I remember, and the Attack Shark R2, R3 even. Not outrageous, but not the best bang for your buck because magnesium is just a bit more expensive. So just to bring it back full circle, I will say these are both solid offerings from Eweadn. The S9 Ultra Plus stands out a little bit more to me because I like the original S9 Ultra, and again, this is just a more refined version of it. If you're looking to spend $60 or less on the Viper V3 Pro shape and you're okay with the mechanical switches, this is a very solid option. No real complaints from me. This is basically your slightly smaller magnesium GPX option. No strong flaws at all. Pretty well built, decent clicks, and like I said, a bit more actually can cost more than the S9 Ultra. I do think you're getting a slightly more complete package here in the S9 Ultra Plus, but again, to each their own. These mice both performed just fine for me in game. No real hiccups in mouse tester as far as like 2K polling and below go. I don't usually test too heavily on 4 and 8K because it's just not feasible, not practical in the games I play. No issues really with the dock here being the wireless receiver for the L1 Pro. And now for a quick sound test. So for some reason, I couldn't get the WebDriver to work this time, but I know I configured it the first time through that. Anyway, this is the desktop version of the driver. You can set your debounce to 0 here on the S9 Plus, as well as your DPI, polling rate up to 8K. And then for the config, you do have the 0.7 option here for the LED due to the 3950, as well as the additional glass mode and 20K Berserk mode, which is what I tested on. I would suggest you use gaming though for better battery life and similar very good performance. The L1 Pro version is the exact same driver, but you lose the 0.7mm LED option, you lose glass mode, and you lose Berserk. The reason I'm not showing you that software is because when you plug this mouse in, it changes your Windows sensitivity automatically. On Windows 11, it took mine back down to 10, which I'm not usually on, and it turned on enhanced pointer precision. This mouse and the driver did that to my computer. What in the actual why? I've never had that before. I don't expect to see it again. Please fix that. So I get the weight on the S9 Plus Ultra coming in completely stock at actually 62.5 grams, so this is over 60 grams. It is on the heavier side of Viper V3 Pro clones. As I've stated in the past, I don't feel that extra weight in game, but it definitely is there and is something you should know about. And then the L1 Pro, the slightly smaller GPX magnesium shape, coming in at 54.6 grams, so a little bit smaller than the GPX, but about the same weight here on the L1 Pro. This is virtually a Viper clone. I've done the shape comparison before. I'm not going to do measurements, but I will grab some L1 dimensions as I find that interesting. The narrowest point on the L1, that being where the magnesium is 57.1 millimeters. The back flare, very tame at 61.2 millimeters on this very potato shape. You get the max hump height here around 37.5 millimeters. The measurements are weird because we have this little blip here for this charging, and the sensor skate here sort of throws off the actual height, but it was around 37.5 to 38 millimeters. The comparison I want to do is to the 2C. I'm clocking that hump height at 38.3 millimeters, so it is a taller mouse. That about wraps it up for my thoughts on both the S9 Plus and the L1 Pro from Eweadn. A couple of well-implemented mice after a couple of very popular shapes in the mouse space. I will say the S9 Plus is the best version of their Viper V3 shape. It's just slightly more refined in every way. However, I would have liked to see them get this under 60 grams, as it is just a bit on the heavier side. Not something that bothers me, but could be a consideration for some people when purchasing this mouse. And then there's the L1 Pro, a solid magnesium offering. I do appreciate the different colorways they have. I would like to see them experiment with maybe some faster skates in the future, but I do appreciate the move they made toward more pad skates, and looking out to see what else they have in store here soon. Please subscribe and like if you enjoyed the video. You can follow me on X at DasherZach. Check out the Mousecast podcast on Phalange's channel. Join up with my Discord. And with that, we'll play you.